The ancient oral mind used nature and her manifestations as one of its primary intellectual reference. When a literate mind wants to look up an idea, it goes to a dictionary or encyclopedia. Without writing, the oral mind, no less sophisticated in its capacity, must turn to an object nearby that manifests the behavior or characteristic of the thing to be considered. This is called the analogy principle. Thus, an oral philosopher will point to a tree if he wishes to discuss a principle of birth or death, or a rock if he wishes to discuss the characteristic of stability, or a river if he wishes to convey the power of motion and change. Often attached to these objects in oral societies are narratives called myths, which extend the oral lexicon in a multitude of ways. For now, an object united with a myth can detail not only principles of the object, but narrative details of history, ancestry, or an explanation of the origin of things. In oral societies, myth is a kind of technical language which can be used as a memory primer, much like a dictionary or encyclopedia is used by a literate person. One chief aspect of nature employed by ancient oral peoples was the manifestation of the sky. Ancient myth is pregnant with celestial motifs. Ancient oral societies kept fastidious calendars, measuring their seasons specifically for their rites and festivals. Without a printed calendar, a meticulous measuring of the sky was ubiquitously employed across cultures, and the regular rhythms of the sun, moon, and stars, in part, explains a few of the similarities between myths across cultures. This presentation is an examination of a few of these celestial, mythic motifs, with their celestial reference explained. Ancient religion was not orthodoxic, requiring strict adherence to a list of doctrines or texts. Rather, it was orthopraxic, requiring strict adherence to prescribed rituals. But these rituals not only had to be performed in the right way, but also in the right time. The New Year's gathering, for example, had to occur on the day of the New Year. For modern people, looking up the right day is easy. One just refers to the printed calendar. But there were no printed calendars in ancient oral societies, and calendar making was one of their chief concerns. How did they do it? From earliest times, the cycles of the sun and moon were calculated with extreme accuracy. If one stands and observes the sun rise in the east, one will notice that the sun actually rises in different spots on the horizon. The sun drifts north on the horizon during summer, stopping at its extreme north position at summer solstice. The sun will then drift south on the horizon, stopping at its extreme south position at the winter solstice. Halfway between these two key points are the days of equinox, the only periods where day and night are of equal length. Anciently, all kinds of markers were erected to mark this apparent path of the sun. Indeed, standing on a prescribed sacred spot, one could place a post, pillar, or rock to mark where the sun rose, demarcating the year throughout its quarterly cycle. Natural landscape features were also employed, so that the rising of the sun over a certain mountain peak would mark the prescribed day that needed to be remembered. Everywhere in the ancient record, architectural and natural features have been found to aid observers in dividing up the solar year. Gnomons and key openings in rock were also employed, so that the shadows or light could be captured upon a spiral which marked the days of the year, or in a glyph whose component parts tracked the sun through its cycle. These calendar implements were made with a great deal of talent and sophistication, and have been found on every inhabited continent. There is, however, another way to track the sun with even more precision. Not only does the sun move across the horizon, but it does so on a background of stars. Observers would see in the pre-dawn light specific stars on the horizon which would receive the sun as it breached. The stars change throughout the year, so that on spring equinox, one group of stars were present before dawn. At summer solstice, another group. At vernal equinox, another group. And at winter solstice, still another. One could also note where the sun set in the west and the stars that appeared right after sunset. Now, by observing artificial and natural features of the landscape, as well as the stellar background, an observer could accurately determine every day of the year. To help keep track of all of this phenomenon, stars were grouped into constellations, images and motifs about which stories could be told in such a way as to track the luminaries through the year. Myths, then, become the intellectual reservoir of technical processes. In early days, the stars that marked the rise of the sun at spring equinox were the Pleiades in the constellation of the Bull, Taurus. It was these stars that announced the birth of spring at the right time. Leo received the sun at the summer solstice. Scorpio received it at the autumnal equinox. Aquarius received it at the winter solstice. In one of the best-known hymns in the Vedas, we read, "Let me now sing the heroic deeds of Vishnu, who has measured apart the realms of earth, who propped up the upper dwelling place, striding far as he stepped forth 3 times. Let this song of inspiration go forth to Vishnu, the wide-striding bull, who lives in the mountains, who alone with but 3 steps measured apart this long, far-reaching dwelling place." It is strange imagery, to be sure. Our first clue of interpretation is the Sanskrit verb skamba, meaning to prop up. It is related to the noun skamba, meaning pillar, but refers to a specific kind of pillar, the celestial axis. The top of the skamba is the pole star, the bottom the south celestial pole. The propping up provides a real context. Vishnu creates the universe in 3 steps. Of course, the ancient universe was 3-tiered: heaven, midworld, and underworld. The 3 steps, however, are nicely portrayed on the horizon with the sun rising at its sacred loci. The bull god Vishnu walking across the heavens, creating the seasons, the 4 directions, and all measured space and time. So it is that many early pantheons in the Near East and Mediterranean are filled with bull gods. The Babylonian Enlil, Rudra or Indra in the Rig Veda, Apis in Egypt, El and Baal in Canaan, and a host of others display the bull as head of the pantheon. The virility and power of the bull was not just terrestrial, it was also celestial. The king was re-enthroned in a ritual performed when the sun and stars announced the new year and new life. Myth, ritual, and royalty were wed within the cosmic cycle. But the bull was also a symbol of the moon, and a lunar calendar was kept with the solar one, and may have been the first calendar devised. The moon cycles are in many ways more complex than that of the sun. The first thing to notice about the moon is its phases. Over 29.5 days, the moon cycles from a waxing crescent to a full moon, waning to a gibbous crescent, and finally to darkness as the new moon. This cycle reveals the life process in its entirety: birth, growth, strength, old age, death, and finally resurrection into a new cycle of life. For this reason, the moon was almost always mythologized as a female, for its phases analogized the gestation cycle of birth. The crescent moon reveals the bull imagery, for these were imparted in myth and symbol as bull horns. The bull imagery is often associated with the Great Mother. Thus, the bull image does not just stand for the constellation Taurus, but is often associated with any loci of death and rebirth. The Egyptians, for example, modeled one of their most ancient mother goddesses as a divine cow, Hathor, while the northern constellation of the Big Dipper was imaged as a bull's thigh, for here was one of the stellar mansions of celestial rebirth and kingship. Further, there is a triune aspect to the lunar phases: crescent, full and new. Thus, in myth, we often see the triune goddess, Demeter, Persephone, and Hecate as one example, but also the three fates, the three charities, and the three graces. Finally, the period of new moon between the death of the old crescent and the birth of the new crescent lasts 3 days. This 3-day cycle is embedded in many religious traditions, where one dies and lies entombed, or descends into the underworld for 3 days, only to rise again. We see this pattern in the narratives of Inanna, Osiris, Mithras, Jonah, and Jesus. Like the sun, the moon also moves across a background of stars, cycling through the entire zodiac in just under 28 days. This cycle was called a month, in modern English, a month. This 28-day cycle is encoded in myth and architecture the world over. Thus, many kivas and hogans are built with 28 beams, while temples or sacred sanctuaries often incorporate 28 notches, marks, or steps in their architecture or symbolism. Further, like the sun, the moon also rises and sets across the horizon, north and south. This movement is more complicated because the moon is always moving around the Earth. But in this depiction, the green line is the orbital path of the moon and shows the potential risings of the moon across the horizon throughout the year. Thus, markers and landscape features were also set up to track the moon's movement across the horizon, as well as its movement across the stars. It is commonly believed that ancient peoples believed the earth was flat. In the mid-19th century, Washington Irving first suggested that it was the cabal surrounding Christopher Columbus who argued that Columbus just might sail off the face of the flat earth. A little later, John Dewey wrote in American textbooks that ancient peoples all believed the earth was flat. This assertion has been in popular and academic textbooks ever since. The problem with these assertions is simple. They are complete balderdash. We know for certain that the classical Greeks knew of the sphericity of the earth and that it rotated on its own axis. But were they the only ones? Ancient Near East cosmology stated that the earth was flat, floating upon a great cosmic sea. There was an underworld below and a heavenly world above. In Hindu cosmology, the flat earth rested upon a turtle. But this is a late conflation of a very early image. As already noted, oral thinkers used analogy. If one wanted to describe the early cosmos, there are few better things to point to than a turtle. Every turtle has a lower shell, a center body, and an upper shell, describing the three-tier universe. All the more significant, sea turtles in India, like this loggerhead, have bright spots on their upper shell resembling the starry canopy of the sky. Every turtle has 4 fins, which in fact represent the 4 pillars of the cosmos, the equinox and solstices. Every turtle swims in the water but also comes to shore, indicating the root image of creation, where the land emerges from the cosmic waters. Turtles lay eggs, a fertile symbol akin to the omphalos. In other words, in an oral society, the turtle is the perfect referent to describe the characteristics of the cosmos. This does not stop modern scholars, however, from insisting that ancient peoples really did believe the earth rested on a turtle. Despite the flat earth cosmologies of the ancient past, the truth is acute observers of the heavens would easily recognize they lived on a spherical earth, for the sky provides a profuse amount of clues. If I were living just north of the equator and looked into the northern sky, I would see the North Star right on the horizon. Here is a depiction of the sky in Sri Lanka, about 7 degrees north latitude, around 2000 BC. Thuban is the closest star to the North Celestial Pole. Through the night, I would see the entire heavens rotate around Thuban, with that star briefly dipping below the horizon. Now, let's say I was a merchant, and I traveled some 1,000 miles north to sell my wares at Mehsana. Looking at the same sky, I would see that as I traveled north, the North Star itself slowly climbs higher into the sky. Of course, if I were at the North Pole, I would have to look straight up 90 degrees to see the North Star. On the other hand, if I sailed south of the equator, the North Star would disappear altogether, whilst new stars would be seen on the southern horizon. In short, if one travels far distances, one can see the angular distances of stars change relative to the horizon, and with that change, the times they rise and set also change. This is impossible to explain if one were living on a flat disk. It is easily explained if one were living on a sphere. Did ancient peoples travel far distances? Yes, they did, and to a great degree. Without maps, how did they gauge their travels? Actually, they used the stars. Seafarers and caravans would have well understood the nature of the earth they traveled on, well before the Greeks.